I grew up in the Mallee and spent my teenage years in southern Tasmania, and then at 17 moved to Melbourne to take up a career in music. I was a jazz drummer. And then I remained. I studied philosophy, and eventually I studied and became a counsellor, etc., whatever. I left the city finally again at 40 and bought a house in central Victoria. And what you can see behind me is essentially my backyard. It's a state reserve, but my house faces straight onto it, and this is where I spend my time sitting. I've just been sitting here for half an hour in silence. Why am I telling you all this? Well, here's something that has always struck me, and I mentioned that I was living in the city for those 23 years so that I'm not kind of putting myself in some position of being, looking on city people, because, well, I was a city person. I lived in the inner city for all that time. I guess if I could have afforded a house in the city without becoming a slave to a mortgage, then I probably would have bought one. I thought about it for a while, although I'm really, really glad I did what I've done. So now I just come back to Melbourne a few days a week and work. Something that's always really struck me about the city is that it is a space, it's an environment that's composed of the abstract. And what do I mean? Well, you look at what you can see behind me, it would be there even if it wasn't for us. Now, I mean, some people actually don't seem to be aware of this, but yeah, human beings have been shaping the natural landscape for hundreds of thousands of years. We've changed the nature of it. It's not like when Europeans arrived in Australia, the landscape was a purely natural landscape. That was actually a deeply humanised landscape shaped by the Aboriginals as landscapes have been all over the world for hundreds of thousands of years. We burn off, we do all sorts of things. But nonetheless, it's basically a natural landscape you can see behind me. What you've got in the city is abstractions in people's minds that have been put out there in concrete and in all sorts of manufactured materials like glass and steel and asphalt. You're living in a space that is fundamentally a space of mental abstractions instantiated by the use of synthetic materials, man-made materials. And so, in a sense, you're fundamentally living in a human mind. You're fundamentally living in our collective mind. And something that happens when we live only in our minds is we go a little bit psychotic. We go a little bit mad. Now, there's degrees of that. I'm not saying that people in the city are psychotic or mad. But what I am saying is that there's a deep need, and it's not just an emotional need where we feel better, but there's a deep need in terms of health of soul, in terms of deep sanity. There's a deep need to be in nature where if we're present in that nature, because you can just tear nature up. You can roll along in your dirt bike or your four-wheel drive, or you can walk along talking philosophy and politics and being completely unaware of what's around you. But if you let nature penetrate you, and there are all sorts of arts for doing that. If you let nature really enter you and penetrate you and change you, then the change it creates is that it does all sorts of healing and transformative work. And it makes you sane. There's a balance here where you need that and you need human society. Because the guys that go off and live in shipping containers in the bush, they can go mad too. We actually need both. We need other human beings to keep us sane. We need human culture and society to stop us from going mad as well. So, okay, this is a complex point. But when you live purely in the realm of the abstract, you also go insane. And so there's a real problem in only being in the city and spending all of your time in the city among the abstractions. I'm not saying you're going to go mad in the same way that I'm not saying that somebody who spends a lot of time alone in the bush, like I do, is going to go mad by virtue of that. These have both got good things about them, but they've got problems. And you need both. And so if you're spending all your time in an abstract world, you can start to go a little bit psychotic. And I think we see this in politics. I think, well, on the one hand, you've got this sort of right-wing country weirdo who's too much out of human society. But on the other hand, in the city, you can get the kind of left-wing sort of madness, the radical left sort of madness, where people become actually kind of psychotic and inhuman in all sorts of ways, even though they're spouting the language of justice and compassion, whatever. And you can also then, on the other hand, get those who are just absorbed by money and greed. It's like their souls have become, again, purely enveloped in that abstract world. You're not free of this by locating yourself in a certain dimension in politics or in philosophy. But if you just live in your head like that, if you just live in that abstract world, you are more prone to going mad in one of these ways that fits with your personality, fits with your temperament, your open left-wing temperament, your kind of conscientious and conservative temperament, or whatever it is. You'll still go mad in any direction. So I think I find there's a great need for me, and especially when I was living in the city, to spend time alone in the bush or by the ocean. And I'd often do that, 3 times a year. I'd go for a week retreat. Now I could do that. You find a way that works with you. Although when people often say, well, it's easy for you, blah, blah, they're often talking rubbish. You value something, you make it happen. It's as simple as that. It is important to find some time, if it's just a single day, okay, here and there, well, that's what it is, to really let nature sink into you. And I'll add something else to this reflection. I have like a first sentence in these reflections. I jump in and then I go where I will. I'll let it unfold. So I'll add something else now that I wasn't thinking about before, and that's, how do you let nature sink in? Well, one thing people might do is go do some meditation in the bush, and that's great. I'm not a meditation expert, but I'm going to make a critical point. That's great. Sometimes I think meditation can be about control. There can be too much control. I'm controlling my breath, like I'm following my breath and I'm doing a practice. If you're going to go into the bush, maybe find ways of really letting it penetrate you. So your mind is not controlling things by sticking to a practice, but it's letting all this beauty that you can see behind me penetrate your mind, penetrate in through your eyes and your ears and your nose, and really enter into you. This is beauty. I'm surrounded by beauty, and I'm surrounded by the other that's radically other to the human, and it's a beautiful other. Let that penetrate you, and so do work on you to dissolve certain things, to transform certain things, whatever it will. Let that beauty you can see right behind me really enter into you. Let that, find a way to open and sort of then absorb that in. That's where you're really letting nature in to really do a transformative work on you. And don't decide in advance all of what that will be. Don't decide in advance everything that nature's going to do. Again, get out of your head and your abstraction, your abstract control, your abstractions by means of which you control things. Let that go and just be open to what's very much beyond the abstract and beyond the human mind. And let that transform you. I could say more and I won't. I'll leave it there. A few thoughts.